Check 1 2, alright. So last video was I showed my artwork, and this video is just gonna be a quick demonstration what software I used to create it. So this name tag was on Photoshop. This self-portrait 5e was on Photoshop. This combining self-portrait was on Photoshop. Artist training card was on Photoshop. This was in my sketchbook. These two warm-ups were in my sketchbook. Then I scanned it. Then I uploaded it to my digital sketchbook. This was done on a template on Photoshop, and I printed it. This was also from a template, but I did on Photoshop. This was also warm-up. Color wheel was done on a template, but I did on Photoshop. This atmosphere perspective was done on Photoshop. This stippling brush on the chart was on Photoshop. Inktober script was on Photoshop. Stippling portrait was done on Photoshop. Inktober bad dog was done on Photoshop. This was done in my sketchbook. Inktober tempting. Inktober snack was also done in my sketchbook and this sketch on a sketchbook. This was done on Photoshop. For these, students had a choice, paper or on the computer. I did mine on the computer on Photoshop. This positive negative space was done on Photoshop. These bubbles were done on Photoshop. This was on Photoshop too, and this. This was done on Photoshop. And this was on Adobe Illustrator, this name tag. And this basic opera was on Adobe Illustrator. This opera groups was done on Adobe Illustrator. This was on Wik Editor. This was on Adobe Illustrator. This project was done on warm up. Was on a sketchbook. This was done on Adobe Illustrator. Yeah, Adobe. This was on Photoshop. Then I wrote it. This was done on Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, Photoshop, Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator, Adobe Illustrator. This is Photoshop. This I just took from my phone. This is Photoshop. This is Photoshop. This was Photoshop. This was Photoshop on the computer, Photoshop. This was done on Photoshop. This was also done on Photoshop. This was also done on Photoshop. This was done on the paper. This project was done on Photoshop. This was also done on Photoshop. I manipulated, I used colors. This was also done on the computer, Photoshop. These two warm-ups. These were done on Google Slides. This was done on Photoshop. And this was done on paper. This video was on Photoshop, and this project was on Photoshop. This was done on Photoshop too. This was done on Photoshop too. This was on Photoshop too. And this was on Photoshop 2. This warm-up was done on paper, and this was done on Photoshop, this video, and this I took a picture of, but this project was on Adobe Illustrator. This was done on Sketchbook, Adobe Animate. This was done on Sketchbook. This was done on Sketchbook, and this was done on Sketchbook. Thanks. I hope you enjoyed my quick showing what software I used for each of these projects. Thank you. Bye.